Hey guys, welcome to this drawing tutorial. Today I'm going to be showing you how to use layers in your digital artwork for making it a lot easier to draw with and quicker, and you can do a lot more with it compared to if you just had one single layer that you just did everything on. So I'll go through some pen brushes as well, how to draw it and everything. So I'll just get rid of all of the layers and I'll start with this sketch layer, the first one I did. So with my initial sketch, what I always focus on doing is getting all of the detail in the first sketch that I'm going to want pretty much in the final product, the final drawing. So, and the reason I do this is so that at the start I know where everything's going to be. Like, I'll sketch out the way the head is, the way the body is. I'll come up with my design right now. I want to know exactly how it should look and how it's going to look before I start adding color and detail, because that way if I need to change anything, then I can change it now without it screwing me over later on. The brush that I use is a custom one I made, and there's plenty of tutorials on making custom brushes, so I won't go through that, but it's pretty much just one that's got a light amount of texture and a bit of like a furry edge. It's the same as what you can see here, and it's just, I like it because it's kind of representational of using a pencil or something. And normally I make this, as you can see, visible, but still the lines are relatively small so I can get in enough detail. So then the next thing I do is I add color to the sketch on a new layer, and this layer I just do below the sketch so that the sketch is on top of it, so that if I color in somewhere I can still see where my sketch lines are for reference. And also it's worth noting that in this layer is going to be underneath the outer shell layer, the color in this area here. It doesn't matter how far down I go over, because then if I go for the outer shell, you'll see that that will cover up all of those lines along there. As you can see here, I've got the outer shell of the robot or mecha, and this is similar to the underneath the skeleton part, where all I'm doing is I'm adding my basic color where it's lighter on the faces that are facing towards the left here, and then darker on the faces that are facing towards the right. And then that's just with flat color using that lightly textured brush. I'll show you what the brush looks like, and I found this one's got just some subtle texture, which is really good for drawing things like robots, where or like a fighting robot where it would have been beaten up a little, but you still want it to have some kind of like smoothness and a sheen to it. But a lot of the time it's all about experimenting and finding out what brush would work best for what you're trying to achieve. So obviously if I was doing chrome, I wouldn't use this brush. I would use like a solid colored one, because obviously chrome doesn't have any texture in it. I added a little bit of shading and highlights to this blue layer you see here, but I wanted to add more shading, so then on a new layer I added a lot of the main shading that I'm going to use in highlights, just so that I can, if I go over the edge, like say for example I was doing a highlight and then I flipped over here, and as you can see there, I can then go back with an eraser, and then I can erase that back. Like, see, I go over the blue here, it doesn't matter because that's on a separate layer, so it's not being affected. And then that just makes it a lot easier to come back and make real smooth lines, not through your initial laydown of the solid color, but by then going over the edges of the line with the eraser. The next thing I guess to point out is that with the layering, I can right click on a layer and then I can duplicate the layer or mask, and this makes just two of the same layers in the same spot, and effectively that doubles the amount, in this case the amount of shading that I've got. So the shading I had that I initially did on that other layer, I figured was too light. So then I duplicate it, and then it doubles the amount of shading that's there. And that's a real easy, quick, and efficient way to do it, compared to if, once again, you're doing it all on the same layer. Then I just added like a hue of pink. Initially, if I show you here in properties, initially I covered in on a new layer pretty much a solid red airbrush, and I figured, to give it a new dynamic, and, as if there was, a red light of some sort that was going on to the mecha, because this would look a lot better than if I just had solid blue. It adds more to the design. But I figured that was, it was too much. It was taking, it was becoming too much of a feature in the design, so I wanted to dull it back a little. So because it's on its own layer, I can edit the layer settings. And so pretty much all I did was got rid of 2 of the color channels except for the red one, and then that dulls it down a lot and leaves just a pink layer. And this also means that any of the highlights, as you can see along here, the highlights will stay there. But if I put back to the original color, you can see that there was a highlight that was running there that now you can't see at all. And the next layer I put on, I had a couple of more layers with more shading and some shadows. Once again, I had one layer and it wasn't giving me enough shadows and shading for what I liked, so I just duplicated the layer, and then it added more shadows, brung out the highlights more. Then the next thing I did was that, I found I can get rid of the sketch now, the sketch layer, because we don't need that. The next thing I did was I made a new layer, and I made sure it was below the outer shell layer. The thing I'm going to be drawing next in real life would be underneath that layer predominantly. So then, of course, when I do it in the drawing, I make it on a layer beneath the shell. So if I just show you that layer, it's pretty much all I did was I went over the initial shading and color that I put down, and I used that same brush. This whole time I've used the same brush, because that's the only one I needed to use, to add some texture, some shading, some dark spots. I added some fine details, as you can see, with the white highlights and then the dark, low lights, whatever you call them. Just once again, adding details, relatively easy to do, and it makes it look a lot more realistic. And pretty much the next thing was I added some ground shadows. As it is now, it doesn't really connect, even though there's no background, but it doesn't really connect with the background at all. It looks like it's just floating in midair. But you can see, as soon as I put down some shadows, they look, it makes it look like it's actually on something where there's some type of background. And the way I made the shadows is I simply you can use the magic wand tool, or you can just use the path tool, or the selective path tool, as I'll do here, I guess. Just select the entire silhouette of the robot. It doesn't really need to be very accurate, but I guess the more accurate the better. And sometimes you can just get away with using the magic wand tool and then doing an inverse selection. Just play around with that. And then, so once I've selected it, the whole thing, then what I can do is I can skew and rotate. I'll put that on the new layer, of course. I'm doing this, the ground shadows layer. I can fill that layer, the selection on that layer, with just like a dark grey, and then I can skew it and rotate it, as you can see I've already done here, so that it makes it look like it's on the horizon, or it's going along the plane, along the ground plane towards the horizon. And then I just, with it still selected on that layer, I use the erase tool with an airbrush to just kind of get rid of the edge, as you can see right here, how it kind of fades off. And the same with the little person. And the little person I added, you should always add something for scale so people can understand, how big the thing is that you're doing. Adds to the realism as well and helps people understand what's going on. The background layer as well, almost at the end. This I used just a different textured brush. It's like a a ground splatter brush type of thing, another one I made, which is similar, but it's got a lot more texture to it. And so I started off by just adding like that brown texture to the ground, and then some pink airbrushing, across the sky here. And then I added in with a white textured brush these buildings in the background, and then with the airbrush, added a little bit of pink highlights to them so that it looked like the pink sky was reflecting off of them. And then once I'd done that, I just added a lot of white and grey along the horizon line to kind of break up the horizon a little. But of course, a lot of this is just I mucked around 2 or 3 times just with different ideas, just laying down different brushes to see what I liked until I got something that looked alright. And that's something that is pretty easy to play around with yourself. And then the last thing I did was just added some dust across at the very top of the layer, just as if there was like a bit of dust going past the person and the robot. But otherwise, that's pretty much how I did it. And then the last thing I did was I then saved it as a JPEG, and then once I've saved it as a JPEG, I'll open it in Critter, which I use Critter, as you can see here. I'll just open it now. And then once I've done that, I can play around with the hues, the contrast, the color I used, and I can just, like, if I don't like the pink and the blue and the green in colors that are there, and I want to completely change it, I'll just do this, saving it as a JPEG so it converts it to one layer, and then it's a lot easier to just change everything at once. And then I'll really hone in, as you can see I'm doing here, just changes the way, say I want to make it look different, I want a different sky or whatever, I want more contrast where I haven't drawn it or haven't shaded in it enough in the start, I can do this all now, and then that kind of really ties everything together. I always, use some kind of filtering effect to help bring everything out and make it pop a little more. But otherwise that's pretty much the entire thing. So have a go. I recommend always using layers over using one single layer. As you can see, I've shown you why. It can just help out a lot. It makes it a lot easier to change things. So thanks for watching.